Cuba's Communist Party is attempting to make the biggest changes in the country has ever seen for more than 50 years. At its Communist Party Congress last week, it adopted hundreds of new reforms that aim to open up the economy and give Cubans new economic rights. It's all part of its strategy to improve people's lives, and it signals a new era in Cuban politics and the country's history.
A final farewell on the political stage. Cuba's former president Fidel Castro makes a rare and unexpected appearance at the closing of the Communist Party National Congress. Some chant his name. Others are moved to tears.
Al compañero Raúl.
It's an end of an era in Cuba's political history, as the Congress officially elects Fidel's younger brother Raúl as the party's new first secretary.
Compañero Fidel Castro Ruz.
The comrade Fidel Castro Ruz, the leader and commander of the Cuban Revolution, gave us the first example of a consistent attitude in this matter when he asked not to be included in the candidacy of the Central Committee. Fidel is Fidel, and he does not demand.
Fidel es Fidel.
Though appearing frail and weak at times, Fidel Castro's appearance is significant. It's a signal of support for the economic reforms started by Raúl after he took over the presidency 5 years ago. During the Communist Party Congress, the first meeting of its kind in 14 years, more than 300 reforms were passed. They include giving people the right to start private businesses and also allowing them to freely buy and sell property, and there are plans to eventually do away with ration books. Cuba hasn't seen this much change in half a century, and the reforms are being adopted as the country tries to get out of an economic slump. An average Cuban earns about $20 a month, but the cost of living is rising rapidly as a small island nation suffers from its worst drought in 50 years. But many Cubans believe the new reforms won't come easily.
If Raúl Castro does do what he says he will do, that all those who have made petitions will be taken into account. They will have a lot of work.
The Communist Party Congress was very much about rejuvenating an old party. Many younger faces are now part of the newly elected Central Committee. But the younger generation is still being watched over by the old guard. Cuba's top leaders, men in their late 70s and 80s, including Raúl Castro himself, remain at the top of the Communist Party hierarchy. With the reforms passed, the hard work of putting them into practice begins. Cuba is trying to change, and its old leaders must rise to new challenges.
To talk more about the changes in Cuba, we are joined by Shending Li, the Executive Dean of Fudan University's Institute of International Studies. He's in Shanghai. And in Havana, we have journalist Carlos Iglesias. Let me begin from you, Mr. Iglesias. Raúl Castro has been declaring in the party Congress that leaders of the party would only have two consecutive terms of 5-year office. So how do you see that kind of policy can be implemented in Cuba?
Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak to the Chinese people. Yes, this is, in my opinion, one of the most important steps taken in the Sixth Party Congress recently, because it is a measure designed to assure the continuity of the revolution, because the old generation that made it 50 years ago is already old and is unfortunately due to depart soon from the public scene. So new leaders must take care, and in this case, limiting the time to 2 terms will make sure that the best are selected and continue in front of the revolution.
But Mr. Iglesias, if I could just follow up on that, Raúl Castro himself admitted during the party Congress that, here I quote, there has been a lack of a reserve of well-trained replacement with sufficient experience and maturity inside the Cuban Communist Party. So what to do? What's the fate for the party for years to come?
Well, we need to. The party needs to change this leadership, because the older leadership is now almost getting out. So these new generations will have 10 years to prove themselves, to be sure that they can make this the main task, which is to continue the revolution according to the Cuban leadership.
There has been another slogan
I think it can be implemented, because you know, there is an experience about this kind of decision. In China itself, when Comrade Deng Xiaoping decided that the old generation could go to the committee of advisors and to help the new generations of leaders to come up and to take the task forward.
Interesting. There's another slogan inside the party Congress which I think needs the explanation of the two of you. That is about the updating of the models to perfect socialism. Professor Shen from Shanghai, from your perspective here in China, how do you understand that slogan, the update of the model, so-called?
Well, I think the Cuban leadership has summarized their past experience, how to build up the country, and conclude that the past model is good but not good enough. They need to draw the lesson of their many difficulties, especially the difficulties that they are experiencing, and they need to update the model. They need to enrich their experience to add some opening, some flexibility to vigorize the economy in order to improve their people's life. I think that is what, in my opinion, it would mean to update the model. The party would allow more flexibility.
Mr. Iglesias, if that is the case, whether you agree or not, first of all, and secondly, if that is the case, what does it mean for the role of the Communist Party in Cuba, and what does it mean for the role of the market, for example?
Well, you know, it's important to know exactly what update means. It means that here in Cuba we have been building socialism, but not in the appropriate way. Some mistakes were made, some difficulties arose in this half century. You don't forget that we are close to the United States, and the United States 11 administrations have been hostile to Cuba. So the economy was quite close, and the inflexibility was rampant in the whole structures. Now the situation is different. We need to make a better, more efficient and disciplined economy. So it's necessary to update it, and it's a new stage now, because as I told you before, the old generation is about to leave, and we need to make changes to continue improving the people's living standards.
Talking about improving people's living, according to the new policies, it is allowed to sell and buy homes for the ordinary Cubans. And also, policy checks should be done or periodically about the taxes on the private businesses, just in case it's too much overburden, because that was the situation before. So with that in mind, do you think it is a recognition of the realities already happening in Cuba, or rather this is a very new set of policies likely to be implemented and therefore improve people's life in a great way?
It is mainly a recognition of what was happening in Cuba, because all these measures only establishes legally what was done illegally before, because of many prohibitions and many inflexibilities in handling the economy. Now the economy is more open. This self-employment brings the possibility for people who are excessive in the state staffs to have a way of living, and it's not a bad way of living, I can say, because it's a little bit better than state wages. Right. So I think these measures could make a good point for the Cuban near future. Of course, the social processes are not stagnant. They are always in evolution. So perhaps in the near future, there will be a need for more steps to be taken. And even in this Congress was said that during the national conference in January 2012, they will be check all these decisions, how they are going, and if it is necessary to continue changing. As Fidel said, that everything that must be changed, and that's revolution.
Professor Shen, here comes the interesting point. Inside Cuba, we understand there's also another change happening, that is to lay off workers from some of the state-owned enterprises and companies. And that is exactly what happened in China decades ago. And as a result, some people suffered, some policies have to be make sure that these people can improve their lives. So how do you see the comparison that we can have between Cuba now and China, let's say a decade ago? And is there any lessons and experience that Cuba can learn from China?
I think the Cubans leadership must have realized that their present economic model may not have taken care of the economy very well and efficiently. They have to unleash people's enthusiasm to do their business well, to allow certain kind of private sector to make them to be able to do the entrepreneurship. In this way, better to allow people to do their own business, and the government would take care of the overall planning. This certainly we can compare with China's experience 30 years ago. But I would like to say, learning is mutual. Cuba could learn some good experience from China, and China could also learn something from Cuba, especially for the government-mandated free education and Medicare. All
right. Mr. Iglesias, very briefly from you, we see the decades of economic embargoes against Cuba by the West, by the U.S. specifically, but at the same time, we see there's still quite some popularity of Cuban leaders. As far as I know, 100,000 tweeters are following Mr. Fidel Castro and Raúl Castro. How do you see the two sides of the story?
Well, I think it's, I agree with Professor in Shanghai that the situation was complicated and we can learn from both sides. I was in China in 1978 when the reforms started, and I could compare how it was before these measures were taken and afterwards. Of course, it was the beginning, and it is the beginning now here in Cuba too. So it's a matter of a little of time. I know it's difficult for social affairs to wait, but in social affairs it's better to make it gradually, and that's something I think we learned from China, that we have to go slowly in Cuba, and to be sure that these steps will be implemented safely and that people will suffer the less. For example, now it was announced that 500,000 people would left state staffs, but it was then moderated, and now it's going slower. It was supposed to be done for last March, but now it's still going on because it's a big amount of people. So I think gradually moderation is a kind of rule now for these measures.
All right, Carlos Iglesias and Shending Li, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you.